The Maple Leafs sing the blues as St. Louis slips past in a shootout. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs fall 6-5 to St. Louis in a shootout, their first shootout of the season, and it was a pretty wild game, Dave. The first for both teams, of course, since the new year. And this type of game tends to be ones that are played in the afternoon, maybe not on just a random Tuesday night, but very clear from the get-go that this was not going to be a tight one. These two teams obviously battled in a pretty wild one just last week, just 8 days ago. So no surprise that they meet again, and there's plenty of fireworks. Maybe not a type of game that both coaches want to see, but very entertaining for media and for fans.
Yeah, and so you can call it entertaining. If you've been around watching or covering the team like I have, it's probably disturbingly familiar is how I would put it, just because this team had kind of established, this defensive identity, and I guess they're due for these type of games, and good on them for salvaging a point. But this is a St. Louis Blues team that does not have Ryan O'Reilly. Granted, Vlad Tarasenko is not the player he used to be. They don't have him either. It's a team that's struggling, that they should have been able to put their foot on the proverbial neck of this team, and they didn't do it. And if anything, they had all kinds of issues, and special teams was a bit of a nightmare, which has not really been the case for the Toronto Maple Leafs this season. So it was the first game of 2023, and I kind of tongue-in-cheek said that this reminded me of, or I said the 2023 Toronto Maple Leafs remind me of the 2021 Maple Leafs, which was this, shootout, gunslinging game between different offenses at the cost of no defense. And that certainly looked like what was happening. At least in that second period, there were 6 goals total. And it just seemed to kind of get crazy and chaotic, and that does not bode well for the Leafs. They typically do not do well in the long run when they get chaos involved in their games. So yeah, they got the point, and I guess that's good. But this is a game that they're going to have to dissect a lot of tape and just use as a reminder. This is the team we used to be. Do not be this team if you're going to have any postseason success.
Yeah, they definitely cannot continue to play this way. As you said, it's very reminiscent of the old Maple Leafs and not so much of this year's team, which has become one of the better defensive squads in the NHL this season. Let's hear from the head coach, Sheldon Keefe, who gave his assessment of what he saw.
I thought special teams were a mess for us in the first period. Second period, I guess, there too. So that kind of throws the game off a lot. Obviously, the scores go way up, and feeling probably a little bit worse than you need to or than you should, because you're pulling it out of your net 3 times there. But I thought we made some mistakes and paid for them. But like the way that we kept coming back, and after costing us early in the game, the power play comes through for us to ensure we get the point. So, not a night we're going to love too much, but fortunate to get to 1 point here.
It's never good when the coach drops a sigh right off the bat before he even answers the question, because he's just so frustrated with what went down in the game. But if there's one thing we can say about this team, Dave, is that they, always find a way to turn things around. They really haven't let things spiral out of control. I know there's been more of these games of late than maybe they would like the Maple Leafs, of course. But, the game in Arizona wasn't particularly great, but they played pretty strong against Colorado. You wish it wouldn't be followed up with a game like this. But, if there's one thing that we can say about this team, that they are resilient, and they probably will bounce back and turn things around.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, they've got a lot of games at home here. That's the big thing going into this, is they performed pretty well this season with a lot of road games, particularly in November and December. And they've got a stretch here after today where they've only got 4 road games. The furthest trip is Boston. They're all relatively close and in the Eastern time zone. So this is their chance to really kind of make some hay. And so you can give them a pass if you buy Sheldon Keefe's logic that he has used. I'm surprised he didn't use it this time, maybe because they had an extra day to rest. But typically he says that first game at home is an extension of the road trip because they're just kind of getting back and getting settled and adjusted. And even though that road trip seemed short, there was a lot of travel in that, and it felt pretty long even for someone who didn't play and was on that trip. And I'm referring to myself, of course. So coming back here and having that type of performance after they had a full day off and then another day to practice, I don't think that boded well. But again, it's just one game, and I'm curious to see how they bounce off of this because when you get it home and you know you're going to be here for a while, this is where you don't really necessarily have the escapes to kind of get the team bonding, to kind of get some of the other things that you might need if things do go wrong. So good on them for showing the resilience. This team has always been a resilient team. Whenever they go down, they manage to kind of cut it back. There's many different times they turned a 2-goal deficit into a 1-goal deficit before finally turning it into a 0-goal deficit and then managing to steal a point out of this one.
Yeah, definitely good on their end. I mean, luckily they didn't lose it in overtime tonight, which would have been a fun conversation to have because the 3-on-3 overtime has been a bit of an Achilles heel at times for them this season. One thing that continues to be a positive and a constant is the top line of Auston Matthews, William Nylander, and Michael Bunting, who all got onto the score sheet this evening. Let's begin with William Nylander, who scored a goal, his 22nd of the season. He also added a pair of assists. He says it was not the Leafs' sharpest game of the year.
I thought we were a little sloppy there in the second period, and they got a couple goals, and we were able to score and battle back, but kind of a sloppy game from our side.
Yeah, he kind of encapsulates everything that Sheldon Keefe was talking about earlier in that clip. But that first line, Dave, I mean, Auston Matthews, we'll get to it in a moment here with career points number 500 and 501. But ever since they've been put together, it's just been a magic, of course. You know, Nylander, Matthews have played a lot over the years. Michael Bunting has found his game over the last month or so. And you just look at the numbers, whether it's, expected goals, scoring chances, they are arguably the most dangerous trio going right now in the NHL. And not that it was bad when Mitch Marner and Auston Matthews were together earlier this season, but it kind of makes you wonder, what the offensive numbers would have been like had maybe these three been put together. Or do you think maybe they were put together at the perfect time when things maybe were not working out for the Maple Leafs offensively?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think Bunting wasn't necessarily the reason that Matthews and Marner were not working well together, because if you look back at those lines, it was really the separation of just those two stars on different lines and getting someone like John Tavares, a different line mate, that really kind of created that. And then when those points were coming, they kind of put Bunting back into that spot, realizing, okay, well, we've got that kind of figured out in that opening month of the season. Let's put Michael Bunting back in there and see if that works. And it did. To me, it was more so just Auston Matthews finding the right chemistry on the right side, not necessarily not having success with Michael Bunting. And then you just see it now. You see that it didn't matter whether it was Nylander or Marner at that point, that Bunting wasn't necessarily the reason why that trio wasn't working, although to a fault, because he's a perfectionist. He actually said that he wasn't going to the net as much and maybe doing some of those things and getting away from it, that about a month ago or so, he identified that. And then that was kind of where he was able to kind of turn his game around. I actually remember, I think it was in Detroit, there was a game in the morning skate where he was just kind of like, I got to get to the net more, because that's kind of how I built myself here. That's where I was getting success. And I've just got to be that pest again. And then once he found himself again, there was some sort of offense that was kind of going with Auston Matthews and in this case with William Nylander. But I don't think it really mattered necessarily who was on the wing with Matthews and and bunting in that situation. I think that was more of a symptom of Matthews kind of having the early season point struggles. And while he's finding his game now, he's still not at the clip that he was at this point last year, of course.
Yeah, it hasn't been too many multi-goal games for a guy like Auston Matthews, but he is doing it all over the ice tonight. The 200-foot game was very evident again for Matthews, but career points number 500 and 501 tonight, becomes the fastest player in Leafs history to get to that mark, besting Mats Sundin and Rick Vaive by 50 games, which is absolutely outrageous. Matthews spoke post-game about his accomplishment.
I think there's definitely some special meaning behind it, just with the history of this organization, the players that have come and worn this jersey before us. So, I've been fortunate every year to play with some great players, have a great team around us, and so it definitely means a lot.
Dave, there's always going to be people of an older vintage that will argue for some of the other greats the Maple Leafs have had, whether it's a Dave Keon or a Darryl Sittler, players of that ilk. And look, some of those guys won Stanley Cups. You go further back, of course, and you can make the argument that, as far as accomplishments go, there are greater Maple Leafs that have worn the blue and whites and the Maple Leaf. But I think it's kind of hard to argue, especially, seeing a stat like that where he bests Rick Vaive and Mats Sundin by 50 games to get to the 500-point mark. For me, Auston Matthews is the most talented player I think we've ever seen put on a Maple Leafs jersey. So pretty incredible to think, all those years ago when the Maple Leafs had the lottery balls drop their way, that they get Auston Matthews, and here we are where he's at 500 points for his career in 445 games.
Yeah, that mark is certainly outstanding, especially you mentioned the clip there, and then Mitch Marner's right behind them, and he's going to best those guys by 47 games or so, or however many it's going to be, because right now he's got 3 points away from getting to 500. So it's kind of crazy there. I know Marner's played more games. He's been healthier than Auston Matthews, so there is that element as well. So I don't remember the exact games played, but he's going to beat those guys as well. And it just speaks to this generation of skilled players that the Toronto Maple Leafs have, their offensive identity, the sheer talent that these guys have, both of them with excellent 200-foot games. So they're doing it on both ends of the ice. And really, they become team accomplishments that way, that they've got this core, these players that can really do something and make some hay. And it's just really going to be up to them to kind of take what this means and translate it into postseason success and building on something special and big in Toronto, which is, trying to get a Stanley Cup. But I think fans will just take getting around and showing some meaningful progress with this nucleus here, and having these regular season accomplishments mean something in the long term.
Absolutely. And it's tough with the way things have gone with all these first round exits, but I really do hope that people don't take it for granted, the era of the Maple Leafs that they are watching right now, with guys like Auston Matthews and Mitch Marner and Willie Nylander and obviously John Tavares, like guys that, 20, 30, 40 years from now, we're going to look back and say that those guys were some of the best players of their era and some of the best players of all time. So it's pretty remarkable to see Auston Matthews get there, and 501 already. So he's on his way to 600. Let's talk about the goaltending a little bit here. And once again, Dave, Ilya Samsonov with some struggles between the pipes, 27 saves on 32 shots, gave up 3 goals on 4 attempts in the shootout as well. Samsonov said post-game, it's been a rough go of late.
Tough game for me. Again, last 4 games really tough for me. I'm doing a lot of scores, but it's not reality right now. I believe my skill. I believe my mental spot. I didn't see problem with my technically or physically. I feel pretty good today. But again, 2 bad bounce and maybe lucky show me ass right now, yeah. But I know how I was working with this. How I say, I believe my teammates. I believe what I do every day. I look to smile for the future, yeah.
So Ilya Samsonov not smiling too much these days with the way things have gone. And I said it before, Dave, I was not expecting him to continue to put up sub 2 goals against average and a .930 save percentage for the entire season, there was going to be some regression. Unfortunately, it's come in 4 straight games, and maybe not, a bad one here, a good one there, a bad one here, a good one there. It's been a really tough stretch for him of late. And like you said, there were some bad bounces tonight. There was that Braden Shen bounce that ends up behind him. He dives for a puck that he thinks he gets and knocks it away, and it ends up going on another St. Louis Blues player stick, and they score the goal. I mean, the shootout is the shootout. There's a lot of randomness that goes into there. Sure, there are some goalies that are, better at the shootout than others, but a lot of times it is, just a game of luck, and you just hope that the way it works is in your favor on that evening. But just on the whole, I mean, when you look at Samsonov's game right now, what are you seeing from him?
Yeah, I mean, technically, I saw on the broadcast there that they were kind of saying he kind of looks slow and he's kind of fighting it a little bit. There was a little bit of that, but I didn't see much different from a technical standpoint that he had been kind of going with. I think it's tough when you give up a bad goal very early, especially shorthanded one, that can throw you mentally for the rest of the game. And it seemed as though, even though he tried to battle back and do those things, he was getting some other bad bounces and some other difficult things that were kind of going the other way that was just compounding things. And so because he's had those other bad games, it's starting to affect him a little bit. But this was not the regression to the mean I think we expected. And you start to wonder, what is the mean in this case? Because he was so good so early. He's still undefeated in regulation at home after this, as the team fought back to get a point, and he had some pretty good saves in that overtime session as well, and late in regulation. That should help with his confidence. But this is going to be something that they're going to have to address if it continues. That's the 4th straight game of a below 900 save percentage, and so you worry about the pattern. You worry about where the goaltending's going to kind of go. Matt Murray has also kind of had a bit of a dip, although it's not been the same kind of trajectory or cliff, I should say, that Samsonov has kind of been going through here. But the team is still getting some results in the wake of this. And so in that way, it's kind of problematic because it's, the Leafs got results with Peter Mrazek in goal, and that wasn't a good solution. And same with Jack Campbell at times when Campbell was struggling. So the Leafs really want to make sure that whatever they have going on with Samsonov, and this is something that I'm sure Curtis Sanford will work on, and some of the other things from a mental standpoint, that he'll just recalibrate. Maybe he doesn't go in back-to-back. Maybe they give Murray 2 to kind of see where that goes if the results start to kind of fall. But right now, both goalies are getting points in the standings, so they can kind of work through it right now. But if anything, Samsonov is very honest. And the most important thing he said there was that he still believes in his ability, and he didn't seem to be too rattled. He was kind of more sad about it, but not rattled about it, and kind of still had more of an upbeat demeanor about the fact that he knows nothing's wrong technically. He knows nothing's wrong with other things. He's just, as he said, his luck is ass right now. So that's kind of what at least I'm pretty sure that's what the audio clip said. We were kind of having a debate. I didn't want to tweet it and get it wrong, but that's pretty much what he's kind of saying. So he's realizing the error in his ways, but he's going to get it back. It looks like, at least he's confident in that. But this might be a chance now where they're alternating games. You give Murray another one. And if Samsonov struggles again, maybe you start looking at back-to-backs here, because they do have a back-to-back Saturday, Sunday, where they're going to split. Maybe you go Murray for 2, Samsonov for the first one, and then back to Murray in the second half of the back-to-back if they want to give Murray 2 of 3.
Well, you referenced Peter Mrazek, and for me, that is like the worst-case scenario.
Absolutely.
If Matt Murray... And, well, I mean, outside of having Peter Mrazek on your team again, the worst-case scenario for this current Leafs is to have both Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov playing poorly at the same time. Like, it's not ideal, of course. You would love both guys to be playing well together like they have at large points of the season when they were not hurt. But if you have one guy, like if Matt Murray is the guy and he takes the ball and runs with it and becomes the 1A, and Samsonov continues his struggles or, can't figure it out, that's okay. That's not the worst thing in the world. But if both of these guys, start going downward and can't figure it out, then you're really in trouble.
That was a concern, right? That was really what a lot of people were worried about when this was the goaltending tandem that the Toronto Maple Leafs went with. Although less about Samsonov, I would argue more people had concerns about Murray, and myself included. I think when they got Samsonov a couple of days after acquiring Murray, it made some people who are concerned about the goaltending situation at least feel better that they had better depth at the position, but you didn't necessarily feel great about who the starter necessarily was. So it's kind of right back to the same concerns of the offseason. And if these two goalies, which are, again, reclamation projects, have what it takes over the course of a full season, we're going to find that out.
All right, back to special teams. Sheldon Keefe talked about it earlier that things did not start well for the 5-forward power plays. They gave up a shorthanded goal to Brandon Saad early, but were able to get it back later. Michael Bunting picking up a power play goal. He scored another one as well at even strength. He's now got 9 goals in his last 12 games. And you referenced it earlier, Dave, but Bunting himself says he's been getting back to his game, and that's what turned it around midway through the year.
I remember earlier in the season you were talking about kind of finding what your game is again, just being that guy who goes to the net and kind of get that going. What was the turning point for you, do you think?
I think just committing to that, committing to what makes me successful when I'm playing, and I think I've been doing that as of late, just kind of getting in the net, playing those hard areas, and bumps and bruises come along the way with that, and which is okay. But that's my role on this line, and I'm happy to do it and create space for these guys, and they're playing really well, and we're producing, so hopefully we can keep that going.
Okay, so I have to raise my hand here because you know that I have not loved the 5-forward power play, and I think maybe it's suboptimal, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you referenced Michael Bunting, and I agreed with you that maybe he is not the swing guy. He is not in that echelon of player that maybe would have made it worth it to go 5 forwards on the power play, but at least for the last 2 games, he's got 2 power play goals, so he is making us eat a bit of crow right now. But I will say he has become sort of, maybe not the focal point, but he has become a contributor to this 5-forward power play where guys are looking for him in that bumper spot. I mean, one thing he does well, obviously, is get to the net, cause havoc, create traffic. So, if that's what the Leafs are looking for with this 5-forward power play, that maybe a guy like Bunting and having Tavares there as well can create a little bit more space for, the guys like Auston Matthews, William Nylander, and Mitch Marner out high, that, maybe it is worth it, even though you're going to give up, I wouldn't say the occasional shorthanded goal, because that's the first time they gave one up. But, the risk and reward, maybe it is worth the risk to have a guy like Michael Bunting there doing what he does.
Well, the number one thing I even asked Sheldon Keefe after the game, that how important it was to kind of stick with it, even though it finally got scored on. I had a lot of people being like, well, that's the last we're going to see of the 5-forward power play after giving up a shorthanded goal, especially so early in the game. But that wasn't the case at all. They went right back to it. And Keefe referenced something he said the other day, which was, if we're going to do this, we're going to give it every chance. And just because it gets scored on doesn't mean we're going to give up on it right away. And so as long as he's going to give it some runway where there's going to be more good than bad with it, and I guess it was kind of a wash today. I'm trying to remember, was it 1 or 2 power play goals for Bunting? I think it was just the 1. So, just the 1 power play goal for Bunting in that regard. So it kind of washes out, right? So, I don't know. It's to me, I kind of wrote a piece today on SI about the fact that I don't even look at it now as a 5-forward power play. I look at it as a Mitch Marner plus 4 forwards at this point, because that's the only reason they can do this. They don't have the personnel or anyone else that they kind of feel like it would make sense to do it. And if you look at it, it kind of makes sense because, the Leafs don't have a Cale Makar, an Adam Fox, a Roman Josi, who are bona fide scoring offensive defensemen. Morgan Rielly's the closest, and as much as people don't like Morgan Rielly or whatever. He is an offensive defenseman. He is their number one, but he's not those guys. So when it comes to the power play unit, in terms of trying to get more offense, you have a guy who's dynamic, who can skate a whole 200-foot game, and make sense to put Mitch Marner there. To make you hate it even more, Rob, yesterday at practice, Sheldon was even talking about Mitch Marner's evolution in that spot might be so much that even if it's not 5 forwards, they may even do Mitch Marner, 3 other forwards, and a defenseman on the flank because of how much trust they have in Mitch Marner in the back. So, and being able to provide that offense and being a distributor that way. So it's not even a 5-forward power play, even though Mitch Marner, by definition, is a forward. He's been flirting with this defensive position all season at even strength. That, to me, this is just Mitch Marner and all the other guys from a deployment standpoint, because they just have that much faith in Mitch Marner's scoring ability and ability to come back and not have an egregious mistake on the back end compared to any other defenseman in terms of that stuff. In fact, when I posed it to Keith after the game about going back with it, his immediate defensive response to that, he's like, well, goals are going to get scored with just one defenseman there. So just because it happened with 0 doesn't mean they're going to scrub it away. So that's why it's kind of sticking around here.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. So, like I said, I've come around to it. It has looked pretty dangerous at times. They got a goal tonight. I know they gave one up on the 5-forward power play, but it just feels like we need a larger sample size to really get a sense of how it's going to go. And you would think the more reps that they get, game reps especially, it's going to look even more dangerous. So, guys are going to get more comfortable. Mitch Marner is going to get more comfortable, and they're going to keep working on it in practice as well. So I do feel pretty confident about it moving forward. I know it doesn't look great, and it goes against convention. Not a great comparison, of course, but I believe the Montreal Canadiens are doing a 5-forward power play too. Their power play is one of the worst in the league. But it just shows you other teams are doing it too. It's
when you're
not
playing
just
that bad, who's gonna notice?
Right. Yeah. But I just mean other teams are trying it too. It's not as if the Maple Leafs are in their own little world here and they're trying to do something for, an experiment's sake. Like, other teams are like, hey, maybe this is sort of the new market inefficiency as far as
I want
power
to see a
plays go.
PK that's 3D 1 forward.
Yeah. Well, I will say, we didn't have to talk about overtime too much because they went to a shootout, but
right.
The Leafs keep doing the David Kampf and 2 defensemen thing. I don't know how many teams around the NHL do that right now when it comes to overtime. So the Leafs may
that
be
one I understand
alone
though
with that. Yeah.
That one I do understand, because when they were doing the offensive element and they were losing the faceoff, they were in trouble immediately. And they weren't even getting scoring chances, and the games were ending so early. At least here, if they lose the faceoff, they've got guys in the back they can trust to kind of get the puck back. But if they win it, they can do that little cycle around the neutral zone, which you saw tonight, which was just, kind of skate around with it and wait for the offensive guys to come and do that on the fly change before you carry the puck into the offensive zone, which they were able to do. And I think this was an excellent example of you probably seeing this 3 defensive type player formation for a little while to come.
All right, coming up on Rink Wide Toronto, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day as the Maple Leafs fall in a shootout 6-5 to the St. Louis Blues. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Do you want to get your business in front of a large, loyal, and engaged audience? Email info@gogoatsports.com to develop an exclusive and custom campaign for your business.
You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. It is Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs were 6-5 losers to the St. Louis Blues in a shootout. Time for the Bodog line of the day. And Dave, we always talk about former Maple Leafs scoring against them. And I'm sure there's people out there that listen to this pod and definitely sprinkled a little bit on Josh Olivo to score against the Maple Leafs. And of course he did. 5 shots on goal in just under 10 minutes of ice time for the former Maple Leaf. And it's so interesting because you look at his, advanced numbers over the last 4 seasons. He's a positive player in both shot differential and expected goal differential when he's on the ice. And St. Louis is very clearly, happy to have him, but he's, bounced around a little bit now with some other teams. And I just don't really get it. Like, he's an effective player when he's on the ice. He's not going to be a superstar by any means. I'm not sure he could play in a top 6, but every time I watch Josh Leivo play, he's doing really good things. And I just wonder, down the line, is that someone, maybe not this year for the Maple Leafs, but like, is that a guy that they could maybe target? Like, he doesn't make a lot of money and would seem to kind of fit what they do. He's a big body guy. He's from the area, has been here before. Like, I just like, every time I see him, I'm just really impressed with what this guy can do. And I'm just stunned that he doesn't get more of an opportunity somewhere.
I think it's because he has all this potential and he looks good on the ice, but like, he's just not converting these things. Like, usually he doesn't convert it as much as he has good possession and there are shots and there is pressure. And while all that stuff is good, generally it's just not converted, or it's not come at times where they absolutely need it. Like, I guess clutch is what he's missing, right? He's just not doing the things they need him to do when they need him to do it. And so that's why, Vancouver moved on from him. That's why there's a whole bunch of different scenarios that had him move and bounce around for a bit. Remember, the Leafs kind of moved him around for nothing because they just didn't want to hold him back because there just wasn't an opportunity for him. And I don't know that necessarily bringing him back is going to change anything, because I don't see where he kind of fits that some of the other bottom 6 forwards can't do that. Like, they have enough of that type of player. Like, what they're missing on the top 6 is a stud, like an absolute, no bones about it superstar that can help on the wing in a top 6 role. And I don't think he's the guy. And if they did grab someone like him, then that creates less cap room for them to get said guy that I think that they should target. So I don't know. It's tough. Like, you're right. Like, from an analytics standpoint and some of the other things, when you see him on the ice, he looks good. The same goes for Calle Rosen. Calle Rosen also got the revenge goal against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first meeting between these two teams on December 27th. So it's kind of funny how that works. But these are guys who the Leafs had a lot of interest in for the same reasons you pointed out. Analytically, they looked great. Like, I think I remember when I was writing at The Athletic back in 2017 and the Leafs were first targeting Calle Rosen to sign him. Just the people I talked to called him like the analytics darling of the Swedish Hockey League. And like, well, that's well and good. It's got to convert for something. And so the potential is always there, but eventually they've got to convert on these. And so that only goes so far. And they're still in the league. They're still around, but they've got to do more to kind of stay around.
Yeah. And look, I'm not advocating for Josh Leivo to play in the top 6. Like, he definitely would be a bottom 6 guy. But I just wonder, like, I know Dryden Hunt, they got him for a reason. They feel maybe there's something there. They like his defensive ability, which is really strong, of course. But I just wonder, like, is Josh Leivo, a guy, maybe that you could put in that spot instead. Maybe has a little bit more offensive punch, isn't going to be terrible defensively. But just kind of throwing a name out there. But the opposition, the former Maple Leafs, on a nice little roll here. You mentioned Calle Rosen with the goal, Dennis Maligan with the point on Saturday, and now Josh Leivo. Does that mean Jared McCann is going to score on Thursday? Like, what's the statute of limitations?
I can't remember.
I think former Maple Leafs go.
McCann scored or had points against the Leafs last season, if I remember correctly.
It's very possible. I just bring it up because he technically was a Maple Leaf because he was picked up, but he never played a game. So, like, where does that kind of land?
Look, I think it still counts as a revenge thing because he was within the organization. I actually do remember a funny story about that. When the Leafs actually acquired Jared McCann, us reporter folk, it's always instinct, right? We contact PR, especially in the off season when these moves happen, and ask, is is said player going to be made available to us? Like usually there is, like they'll email a bunch of us and being like, hey, we're going to do a Zoom call with the new Leaf or whatever, because enough people requested it. Pretty easy to put together. And when we requested for Jamie Buchanan, they were just kind of like, we're going to wait a few days. I guess they didn't want to have any audio on the record, when it was just going to kind of be all for naught. So I kind of understood it. It was kind of funny in that regard. And then, if you'll recall, there was a whole ESPN outtake with Kevin Weeks in the fish market with all the different outtakes where it looked like Alex Kerfoot was going to be the guy taken because of that false outtake that they were just recording that someone put on the internet. And that created a whole to-do. But you knew he was either going to be McCann or Kerfoot, and Kerfoot is a Leaf, and Jared McCann is not.
Yeah, that was one of the more interesting few days, I would say, on Maple Leafs Twitter with that video surfacing, as you mentioned, during the expansion draft, and the guy catching the fish and saying, Alexander Kerfoot. Yep. And everybody lost their minds because they thought that was the one that they taped, but ultimately it was not.
That
was,
person,
like you said, it was
that person should have their phone taken from them, because that is the most out of context video ever put
what a
up.
troll job.
The worst.
That was incredible.
It looked like it was pre-taped for ESPN, and they were going to do a whole bunch. But I don't know, if I'm Kevin Weeks and I see something like that, if I'm part of that, I'd be like, by the way, we recorded a whole bunch of these. Don't buy into this. I would have nipped that in the bud so quickly. But that was allowed to kind of surface for a day and a half. And I remember even Alex Kerfoot saying how stressful that was because he was getting calls from family and friends nonstop about it in that time when he was just trying to, mind his own business and relax, knowing it was going to be a stressful time, but having to deal with that prematurely was kind of nonsense.
Just for a second, imagine that is how you found out that you were moving teams, a dude catching a fish in a fish market. That just would be an all-time thing. Hey, Dad, how did you find out? Or, hey, Grandpa, how did you find out you were traded? Well, back in the day, there was this thing called Twitter, and this video came out of the expansion draft, and this guy caught a fish at a fish market, said my name a few days before the draft, and that's how I found out I was going to Seattle. That's an all-time story if it actually played out that way. I guess I guess Jared McCann found out he was going to Seattle via a fish. So, he's got that story, but
yeah, and
at
then he
least
led
for Alex
the team
Kerfoot,
in scoring.
That was pretty tough. Yeah. Look, he'd be a great Maple Leaf, I think. Unfortunately, Seattle's playing pretty well, so they're pretty happy with him, but definitely one of the more interesting times in recent Maple Leafs history. Let's quickly talk some Twitter here at RinkWideTOR. Let's run through some of the tweets here. Brad tweets in. He says, how are officials assessed by the league? Do they get sent down, sat, penalized in some way for missed calls and poor game management? Complaining about them is as old as the game itself, but some accountability would be good to know. And look, this goes cross sport, whether it's the NFL, whether it's Major League Baseball, the NBA. Everybody wants their officials held accountable. And yeah, they of course are. The league reviews, and we get to Stanley Cup playoff times, and certain officials get better assignments because they throughout the year show that they're in good stead and they perform well. That's really it. They save the best for last, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, there's not a lot they can do aside from once you're in that union, you're in the union. And you have to be extraordinarily, without a shadow of a doubt, bad at your job, in any union, to lose that job, right? That's just kind of how it goes. You see it in baseball. How many times do we hear about Angel Hernandez and his umpiring? Anytime he's umpiring a game, or if it's a Jays game, I see his name trending on Twitter all the time. There's just one of those things where once you're in the union, it's kind of hard at that point. But yeah, when it comes to the special assignments, those will always be given to the more accurate officials, and that's usually judged. They'll kind of look at what was called, what was missed, and kind of assess the score and kind of look at things that way. There could be some retraining if there is some kind of struggling or a different interpretation of the rules, which also happens. So referees kind of have to go through that with the director of officiating all the time in terms of, we're calling this now, we're doing a little bit of this is a little bit different. But then the crazy variable this year compared to previous years is that the NHL had an extraordinarily high number of officials retire. And so they had to call up a whole bunch from a minor league level, from the other feeder systems, to promote them to the NHL pretty quickly. Not saying it would have happened sooner than expected, but they had more vacancies to fill, so they kind of had to do a lot of training and bring people up quicker. And so because of the high turnover, you may see more mistakes. Like any rookie who makes mistakes, it's just going to happen. And so you hope that either the mistakes are minimal, or at very worst, the mistakes are kind of spread out equally among the 32 teams. And so at that point, they kind of figure it out. You hope you don't see a Dan Kelly shoving Michael Bunting and nearly injuring him in the in the boards. That's a whole other thing. I kind of had this debate with someone about how someone who had a pretty egregious suspension at the minor league level, or is suspended for a long period of time, should probably not be allowed to be an official. Like, there are just some tendencies there that you just do not lose. And I don't care what the justification was, because we don't hear it from the officials. But when that happened, I was just kind of like, why is this guy an official? Like, when you read out his history, I was just like, man, like, I get former players being officials, but if you had a pretty nasty, malicious suspension before, I don't think it should disqualify you, but you really need to prove your worth to the public for why you are an official.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, this is sort of a different thing, but I mean, George Peros, a guy that was known for being, a pugilist, if you want to put it that way, right, is now running the department of, player safety and handing out suspensions. So, I mean, it kind of runs in the sport right at the top of the tree, if you will. But yeah, it's a situation. I mean, I don't have any inside knowledge. I don't know if you do, but I imagine, the league probably spoke to Dan Kelly and said, hey, don't do that stuff. Like, you can separate guys, but we don't need our officials shoving guys down the tunnel. Like, that's just a bad look all around.
Well, it could have injured the guy too. And then what? Like, there is no accountability publicly from an official. Like, if we want to interview an official after the game to get like the interpretation of something, there is no pool reporter that can do it in this sport. Unlike, I think football has it for sure. Football has one person that can go in and ask assigned questions and get answers for everybody. I believe baseball has it too. Maybe at the postseason level, I can't remember. But I don't know that for sure. But I do remember the NFL does have that. And I like the way the NBAs do their officiating as well. I do believe they have a pool system, and I actually do like their review system and how vocal they are and explaining all the reviews. I think they do the best job of any of the sports in at least explaining the review process as they're doing it.
Yeah, the last 2-minute report is always, fun read if you're an NBA fan. I don't think that would ever work in the NHL because I think we know, right? The dirty secret, how the sausage is made, is that there's a lot of game management. Like, there's a reason when a team takes a penalty, the most likely penalty is going to be on the opposing team, right? Like, that's usually just how it goes. There's a reason. Yeah, there's a reason teams never take like 4 penalties in a row, because after that third penalty, the next penalty is probably going back to the other side. Like, they like to even things up. They don't want coaches all over them. That's just how the game works, unfortunately. But as you said, there's a situation right now where you got a lot of younger officials. So maybe that will play an impact as we get later into the season. But complaining about officials, you're just going to drive yourself insane. So it's a tough spot that officials are in. It's a tough game to officiate. But tonight, definitely a lot of power plays, definitely a lot of special teams for both sides. But in the end, it is the Maple Leafs that come out on the losing end, 6-5 to St. Louis. The next rink-wide Toronto Post-game show will be on Thursday when the Seattle Kraken come to town. Jared McCann looking for that revenge goal. We'll hopefully talk about that not being the case, but we shall see. Make sure you like, review, subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can give us a follow on Twitter at RinkWideTOR, at DeAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro here from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. New season is well underway, Ray, and we've got surprising storylines happening across the league.
You bet, Dreg. Surprising starts both the top and the bottom of the standings, and some of those coaching and GM seats have got to be starting to feel pretty warm right now.
We've got it all covered twice a week with some great guests joining us right through the end of the season.
It's the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out wherever you get podcasts or at rayandregs.com.